send an automated chat message from an appointment booking in Healthie. In this video, we'll show you how you can automatically start an Awell Care flow when an appointment is booked in Healthie. From within that Awell Care flow, we will then automatically create a chat conversation with the patient in Healthie. This can be particularly useful to let the patient know that the appointment was confirmed, or maybe to send some automated instructions a couple of days before the appointment. By doing so, we save valuable time for our care teams since they don't need to manually confirm and contact each patient. Let's have a look at the first part of the setup, and that's starting the care flow in Awell based on an appointment being booked in Healthie. Healthie allows to subscribe to a wide range of events happening in their system, as you can see here in the API documentation. We can use all of these events to trigger something in Awell, like starting a care flow. But for this video, we're interested in the event that's fired when an appointment is booked, and that's the appointment.created event. We won't go into the details of setting up the webhook, but just know that you can leverage events in Healthie to trigger something in the Awell platform. We have linked all the documentation in the description below to get you going with events in Healthie. Let's have a closer look at the care flow, which will be started when an appointment is booked in Healthie. The first thing we'll do in our flow is fetch the details of the appointment. We can do that by configuring a GraphQL API call action and use the query that Healthie exposes for that, the appointment query. Because the ID of the appointment is ingested in the care flow on pathway start, we can use that ID to request more data about the appointment that was booked. We are particularly interested in the type and date of the appointment because we'll have some conditional and timing logic in our flow based on those parameters. Additionally, we'll also retrieve the ID of the patient because we'll need that to create our chat conversation later on. So we make sure we request those three parameters via the query and that we store them as data points in our care flow. To get yourself familiar with Healthie's API and to know what data is available and how you can query the data, we advise you to have a look at their API documentation, which we'll link in the description below. If you look at the care flow, you'll see I've added some conditional logic as I only want to create a chat conversation when the appointment that was booked is of type initial consultation. Because we have stored the appointment type in the data point earlier, we can easily add conditional logic for that in our flow. Additionally, I also want to create the chat conversation 2 days before the appointment date, which is again something we can easily do here in Awell Studio, given we have stored the appointment date in a data point. So this means we'll only create a chat conversation when the type of the consultation or the appointment is initial consultation, and the system will do that 2 days before the actual appointment date. For all other appointment types, the care flow will be ended immediately. Now let's dive into the creation of the actual chat conversation, which is a two-step process. We first need to create a chat conversation, and we can then initiate a message in the chat conversation we just created. Again, for the details on how to configure these API call actions, we refer you to the description below, but we'll have a brief look at both so you understand the concepts. So we know by looking at Healthie's API documentation that in order to create a chat conversation, we need to use the create chat conversation mutation. So we have configured that mutation in Awell Studio, and as input variables, you can specify the name or title of the chat conversation, which you will give a convenient name here, and who the chat conversation needs to be initiated with. In this case, we want to initiate a chat with the patient, and because we have stored the ID of the patient earlier in a data point, we can easily insert that here. We also need to store the ID of the chat conversation we just created in a data point, so we can use it in our consecutive API call action that we will do to send an initial message in our conversation. Let's now send a message in the chat conversation we just created, where based on Healthie's API documentation, we know we will need to create node mutation for. Here we need to minimally pass two parameters, the ID of the conversation we'd like to add the node or message to, and the content of our message. So we've stored the conversation ID earlier in a data point, so we can insert that here in the variables. And for the content, we can use HTML to add some formatting to our message. In the message, we can also print some dynamic content, like, for example, the actual date of the appointment to enrich our message and to have some dynamic content in there. So actually, we now have everything set up. So let's orchestrate this care flow and have a look at the result. So I've opened up Healthie and Awell here side by side, so we can see everything happen live at the same time. Let's book an appointment in Healthie of type initial consultation for tomorrow. When I book the appointment, a webhook is starting our care flow in the backend, and if I refresh Awell, you'll indeed see that a new patient and a care flow was created. Let's have a look at the care flow to inspect what actually has happened. So we can see here in the first action that we fetched the details of the appointment and that the response contains the expected values for the type of the consultation and date. Because the appointment type is of type initial consultation and we are within 2 days of the appointment date, a chat conversation was created and an initial message was sent. So let's navigate to our chat section in Healthie, and indeed we can see that a chat message was sent to the patient. And that's how you can automatically create a chat conversation in Healthie with Awell Care Flows. Make sure to check out the description below, where we'll link all necessary resources to get started with this integration.